best test of a boat is to take a long trip in one. That's what we intended to do with this Seacraft 23-foot Fisherman and this 23-foot Seacraft Tsunami. The crew for the journey: Phil Stubbs, Chief Lifeguard, City of San Clemente; Mark Martinson, Fisherman, Champion Surfer; Mike Hoover, Mountaineer, Filmmaker, and the photographer on the trip; and myself, Bruce Brown, Head Boat Tester. Our trip was to take us the length of the Sea of Cortez, from San Felipe to Cape San Lucas and return, a total distance of 1,600 miles. A long way in a small boat. From Southern California through the deserts of Baja California, headed for San Felipe, where we would launch the boats. There are no marina facilities in San Felipe. You launch your boat from the beach. The tide range is over 20 feet, so launching didn't sound like it was going to be all that easy. We'd heard about a local guy who had a four-wheel drive truck and could launch any boat at any tide and not even get sand in the wheel bearings. He was kind of legendary, sort of the guru of the beach launch. When we arrived in San Felipe, we asked for the guru, but our Spanish wasn't too good, and it turned out we got the guru's second cousin's friend, who didn't want to disappoint us by telling us the guru was out of town, so he just hooked the Tsunami to the truck and headed for the water. Unfortunately, his ability to read the terrain wasn't great. He headed right for the softest spot and got stuck. We thought he probably had some tricky way to get unstuck. He did. Unhooked the trailer and split. He said the boat would launch itself when the tide came in. We got the Fisherman launch at high tide with no problem and bid farewell to the rapidly disappearing trailer. The guru's friend told us not to worry. He'd go out and get it at the next low tide if it was still there. As a matter of fact, he did, cleaned it up, and it was none the worse for wear. We departed San Felipe, headed south, with each boat loaded down with 800 pounds of extra gear: food, camera equipment, diving gear, spare parts and props, fishing equipment, every book on the Sea of Cortez ever printed, and Mike Hoover's first aid kit, complete with sutures. He kept saying, "I sure hope I get a chance to try and sew one of you guys up." Our first stop would be Gonzaga Bay, about 100 miles south. In these boats, a little over 3 hours. We could cruise at 30 knots, even as loaded down as the boats were. The conditions were as we hoped, like a lake. We planned to spend several weeks fishing, diving, and exploring, and enjoying the warmth and tranquility of the Sea of Cortez. Just before we got to Gonzaga Bay, the wind started to blow. We rounded the point and headed into the bay with the wind getting stronger. By the time we reached the shelter of the bay, it was really howling and very cold. 3 hours out, and our hot and tranquil trip had turned cold and windy. We took on fuel at Gonzaga in the same way you do anywhere in Baja, from a 50-gallon drum. We carried our own hose and pump and gas filter, since the gas near the bottom of the barrels got pretty grim. We decided to wait at Gonzaga for the wind to drop. It was January, and they get some nasty 2 or 3 day northerlies. We waited 4 days, and the wind never started to drop. It was cold and windy and miserable. On the 5th morning, we decided to leave, against our better judgment and advice from the locals. even the big shrimp boats were all in shelter waiting. The Sea of Cortez has a reputation for being calm, but it can get rough as a cob. During the next 5 days we ran, it was victory at sea. For 5 days, we didn't see a boat or a sign of life. Even as miserable as the conditions were, we still could average almost 20 knots in the Seacraft. We thought we'd have fish for dinner most nights, but we hadn't even seen a fish. The highlight of the trip south was the day Mark caught a fish in the placid waters. Phil was happy, fresh fish for dinner. Phil said throw it over and he'd put it on ice. Mark threw it over the side. That seemed to be the way the whole trip was going. Wrong. 9 days out, 3 hours of nice weather, 4 days sitting in the wind at Gonzaga, and 5 days of victory at sea. We got to our destination, Cabo San Lucas, on the 10th day. It was finally warm, and we were out of the wind. Around the Cape, the southern tip of the Baja Peninsula, and into San Lucas Bay. To celebrate our successful arrival, Hoover embraced one of the local lovelies, and we fed the others some old weenies. Phil Stubbs' wife, Pat, and my wife, Pat, flew down to meet us and make the return trip with us. Just after dawn one morning, we took on fuel and supplies at the commercial pier at the Cape and made ready for the return trip north to San Felipe. We were all a little apprehensive about the trip north, since if we hit the northerlies again, it would be a most unpleasant 800 miles straight into it. Phil kept saying, "I'm using up all my vacation. I'm not having that much fun." As we left the Cape, we were even more loaded down, extra people, and all our fishing and diving gear that we hadn't had a chance to use yet. But the boat still cruised at 30 knots. The Sea of Cortez was finally like it was supposed to be, warm and calm and pleasant and alive with life. Schools of porpoise every day. We saw hundreds of whales in the trip north towards San Felipe. Even in the Sea of Cortez, killer whales are a comparatively rare sight. The male with a large dorsal fin, the rest are female. Several hammerhead sharks daily. One day we counted over 100. A good many of the days, we just explored the coast and islands, enjoying the sun and the boats. This is San Jose Island, one of many in the sea. One side is dry and barren, but on the other side there's a shallow mangrove-lined channel that winds its way a couple of miles into the island and opens into a big lagoon. The channel was very shallow, but we only drew 18 inches of water with the engines tilted, so we didn't have any trouble at all making it into the isolated lagoon. We stopped at one end of the lagoon to dig some clams, easily 3 or 4 each time you ran your fingers through the sand. It only took 10 minutes to fill the bucket. We kept clams alive in the Seacraft circulating bait tanks, so almost any night we could reach in the bait tank and have steamed clams. Mark caught some cabria in the lagoon, and later that day, Phil went diving and got some lobsters. For dinner, we usually had a choice of clams, fish, scallops, oysters, or lobsters. In the evening, we'd find a new beach or cove or island to camp. The Tsunami has a cabin to sleep in, but when the weather was nice, we normally slept on the beach. It was so calm, we could just drive the boats right up to the beach to unload our gear. We'd spend the evening stuffing ourselves with seafood and wonder where to go and what to do the next day. It didn't seem to ever matter. It was all fun. This particular cove had a unique feature. It was on an uninhabited island, but there was a freshwater well up this canyon. Freshwater is rare in Baja, particularly on an island. This freshwater bath felt better to us on this deserted island than it would have at any fancy resort hotel. We had 3 weeks to explore on the way back to San Felipe, but it would take a lifetime to see all of the Cortez. Many days we'd spend our time just ripping from cove to cove to see what was happening. Each cove was something different. We never knew quite what to expect. This cove was the territory of this seal, but we didn't think he'd mind sharing it with us. We did a bit of diving, but instead of spearing fish, we usually took a few pictures and just mainly enjoyed the 75 to 80 degree water and watched the sea life perform. There were mantas by the hundreds. And sand eels that pull back in their holes as you come near. And the more common, skates and rays. If we stayed in the water long enough, a shark usually showed up. We thought he was a harmless type, but we weren't sure he was sure he was a harmless type. So we decided to leave. had enough speed to get to the fishing grounds 30 miles offshore in an hour, less if we were in a hurry. We felt a great advantage over the big fishing yachts. When we get where we were going, we'd slow down, put out the outriggers, and troll. We had a tremendous amount of gear on the fisherman model, but it all stored in several hatches below decks and in the council, so we still had clear decks and the full walk-around feature that's so great for fishing. Most of us enjoyed trolling around looking for fins, waiting for something to bite, particularly Mark. Mike Hoover hated to troll. He thought that was the most boring thing you could possibly do, and Mark just couldn't understand why. We saw a lot of green sea turtles. This one had a bird on his back. The turtles are now protected. We wouldn't hurt them anyway. They were all nice guys and didn't try to bite us or anything. Nothing wrong with them, they have bad breath. Phil just talked to him a while, then he let him go. Our main activity in the Sea of Cortez was fishing. And we caught a great number and a great variety of fish. Big dolphin fish like this, some we kept to eat, the rest we released. We caught a bunch of weird guys like this giant needlefish. We tagged a few yellowtail to try and help find out if the same ones in the Sea of Cortez come up the Pacific side to California. The dolphin fish, called dorado in Mexico and mahi-mahi in Hawaii, and in no way related to the dolphin mammal, always put on a good show. Yellowfin tuna are one of our favorites. We never landed any big ones, but lots of smaller ones. They're great fighters and kept both Mark and I busy. Another reason they were our favorite fish is we could have tuna sandwiches daily. The Sea of Cortez is famous for its billfish, striped blue and black marlin, and sailfish. We saw a lot of billfish in the Sea of Cortez, and without really trying too hard, we caught several. Here's one that Mark caught. It's actually much easier to land a big fish from a small boat like this than from a large yacht because the small boat is so much more maneuverable. It's also a lot more fun. Keep any marlin, since they were more than we could eat, and it seemed stupid to kill one just to hang it up to get your picture taken. This guy was a little tired, but really none the worse for wear. Hoover hated to fish, so to keep him from complaining, We towed him around on a piece of plywood we used for cleaning fish. It gave Mark great satisfaction to crack the whip and try and dislocate Hoover's back. From victory at sea on the journey to the Cape to unbelievably pleasant conditions on the trip back to San Felipe, we'd seen the Sea of Cortez in many of its moods. We meant to test the boats to see what they could do. They did everything we asked them and more. 1,600 miles in a Seacraft Fisherman with an inboard-outboard engine and a Seacraft Tsunami with 2 outboard engines. That's a long way in a small boat.